All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely fascinating source that explores the unseen, specifically the hidden forces that it claims are actively dictating our reality. We're going to unpack a narrative that weaves together psychology, quantum physics, and ancient theology to create a completely covered, highly cinematic summary of the eternal battle between body and soul. The premise we're analyzing today is profound and honestly deeply provocative. Let's get right into it.
Let me ask you something. Have you ever experienced a coincidence so bizarre it's just completely unexplainable? Maybe you were just thinking about an old friend and literally a second later your phone rings and it's them. Or perhaps a little voice in your head tells you to check the clock and bam, it's exactly 11:11, the exact same number sequence you've been seeing everywhere lately. Well, the source we are analyzing today asks us to consider a pretty radical idea. What if reality isn't random at all?
Or, let's take it a step further. Have you ever had a dream that eventually played out in real life? The source material points out that the mathematical probability of specific, hyper-detailed circumstances coming together perfectly by chance is staggeringly low. I mean, the average human life is about 28,000 days. You'd be incredibly lucky to hit a massive, mathematically improbable coincidence even once. Yet, the narrative highlights that these events happen all the time, which suggests they aren't just random chance encounters. They're actually hidden messages.
To really grasp what these messages are, we have to look at a concept famously explored by the Swiss psychotherapist Carl Jung back in the 1920s, synchronicity. He defined it as a meaningful coincidence of two or more events that completely defies pure mathematical probability. But what's really interesting here is how our source material elevates this psychological concept. The narrative explicitly refers to synchronicity as the language of God, basically a direct way for the unseen world to communicate with us.
Take Jung himself, for example. He had a defining, incredibly visual experience with this phenomenon. He was treating this highly rational, stubborn patient who desperately needed a breakthrough. As she was recounting this incredibly vivid dream about being given a golden scarab, Jung suddenly heard a tapping at his office window. He opens it up, and an actual scarab beetle flies in. I mean, an insect incredibly rare for that climate, trying to get into a dark room against literally all of its natural instincts. He caught it, handed it to her, and linked her dream directly to the real world.
So, if the unseen world is actively trying to chat with us, what's stopping us from seeing it clearly all the time? Well, the source introduces its core theological premise here, the physical veil. According to this narrative, our physical body acts as a literal veil. It's described as this thick, sensory curtain that completely separates our pure consciousness from the spiritual, unseen realm. The source sets up this really aggressive contrast between the two. On one side, we have the soul, described as a spark of divine light, the eye of the spirit that can actually pick up on matters of the unseen. And on the other side, we have the body. The narrative asserts that physical matter creates the illusion of a finite world just to trap us. Crucially, the text explicitly equates the physical body and the material world with the domain of Satan. It's presented as a literal trap made of matter. Wild, right?
Now, to explain how we actually navigate this trap, the narrative pulls a historical quote from St. Thomas Aquinas. God speaks according to the mode of the receiver. The source frames the human being as essentially a biological antenna. Because we're made up of both that divine soul and the physical body, we have the capacity to tune into signals from either side. We can pick up the divine language of synchronicity, or we can tune into the deceptive, material signals of the physical veil. It's all about the receiver.
To back up these bold theological claims, the narrative takes a sharp turn into the physical sciences, bringing us to a pretty striking number, 99.9%. The source points out a fundamental scientific reality. Our bodies are made of matter, matter is an assemblage of atoms, and atoms are 99.9% empty space. The text uses this to argue that the physical world, this veil that feels so incredibly solid and real to our five senses, is actually, well, mostly an illusion.
To help us visualize this, the source paints a fantastic cinematic picture. Just imagine an atom's nucleus is the size of a single peanut, sitting right on the 50-yard line of a massive, supersized football stadium. That entire stadium represents the atom, and inside that tiny, peanut-sized nucleus is a trapped photon, a minuscule packet of light. The narrative connects this to ancient teachings, suggesting our physical, mostly empty bodies are merely acting as a shell, trapping a tiny fragment of divine light.
Here's where the source connects this atomic reality to its overarching narrative of good and evil. It asserts that because the devil is inherently tied to the creation of our physical matter, he possesses an intimate, honestly terrifying knowledge of our physiological makeup. He knows exactly how the physical body works. This means he understands our biological weaknesses, our bodily needs, and our human desires, giving him immense power to manipulate us from the inside out.
So, how does this manipulation happen? According to the source, mostly under the radar, through subconscious attacks. It claims the devil targets the ego, or the nafs. It even references Quranic scripture regarding the retreating whisperer, a force that manipulates our subconscious minds to cause terrifying, deeply unsettling nightmares. The argument here is that while some dreams are divinely inspired synchronicities, others are direct subconscious attacks from the creator of the material veil, literally using our own fears against us.
To really drive home just how vulnerable we are living in this physical, material world, the source maps out the ancient story of the prophet Job. It details a timeline of escalating physical attacks by the devil. First, the loss of his material wealth and family. When that didn't break him, the devil moved directly to the physical body, inflicting Job with severe sores and worms. Finally, Satan manipulated the people around Job to taunt him. The narrative uses this intense story to show the absolute limits of material suffering.
But here's the twist. The source points out that Job's unwavering faith ultimately frustrated Satan. The main takeaway presented here is that a soul that is deeply, resolutely in tune with the divine can actually overpower the physical veil. Because Job refused to identify with his physical suffering or his material loss, the devil's ultimate weapon, the body itself, was rendered completely useless. The narrative uses this to argue a key point. Whoever controls the receiver, the body or the soul, dictates your reality. Now, the source doesn't just leave this in ancient history. It brings the narrative crashing right into the modern era. It argues that the devil now utilizes mass media and advertising to continually program our subconscious minds on a massive global scale. It points to subliminal messaging that targets our base physical instincts, things like safety, satiation, and sex. It even claims that childhood cartoons and what we literally call television programming are tools designed to keep us entirely focused on the material world, effectively thickening that physical veil.
Which brings us to a pretty chilling statistic highlighted by the source, the number 6. The narrative emphasizes that merely 6 corporate conglomerates own almost the entire landscape of major worldwide media outlets. The text implies that this immense centralization of information makes it incredibly easy for the forces of the material world to broadcast their signal. And in doing so, they completely drown out the subtle, quiet language of divine synchronicity for the masses.
All right, let's look at the climax of all this. The text sets up an impending event it refers to as the Great Return. According to the source material, this is a long-awaited age where the very best and the very worst souls from throughout history have reincarnated simultaneously. It is framed as this highly cinematic, ultimate intersection of the seen and the unseen, a final, epic battle where the forces of the material veil and the divine light will finally clash.
And it leaves us with one final, incredibly provocative thought. If this ultimate battle is happening right now, and if the devil has historically incarnated in human form to manipulate the physical world as the source claims, well, then he is likely walking the earth today, hiding in plain sight. It's a compelling, eerie question posed by the source material. In which body is he hiding? Thank you for joining me on this explainer. Keep seeking, and as always, keep learning.